Are you a U.S. citizen?
Yes. I am Marcus Vance, Senior Executive Director of Operations.
Which agency do you work for?
The very department you serve, Southwestern Operations. My credentials are in the trunk.
Have you ever believed that achieving absolute professional success makes you bulletproof? There is a comforting illusion in our society that if you work hard enough, climb high enough, and earn enough authority, you eventually build an invisible shield around yourself. We want to believe that reaching the absolute pinnacle of your career protects you from the everyday misjudgments and unfounded assumptions of the world. But before we dive into today's story, take a moment and drop your thoughts down in the comments. Do you think a person's rank and uniform can truly erase the preconceived notions others might hold about them? Because the incredible sequence of events we are about to unravel shatters that exact illusion. It teaches us a harsh, undeniable reality. Sometimes the very institution you spent your entire life building can still lock you out in the cold, all based on a single, deeply ingrained misjudgment. What unfolds over the next few minutes will ultimately cost a massive federal department millions of dollars, trigger a sweeping internal reckoning, and prove once and for all that systemic flaws cannot simply be outranked. Imagine climbing to the absolute peak of a federal law enforcement mountain. Meet Marcus Vance. At 48 years old, he is the Senior Executive Director of Operations for the entire Southwestern Territory of the National Border Security Apparatus. To put that into perspective, he holds the reins to over 18,000 sworn officers spanning 4 different states. He answers to virtually no one except the top brass sitting in Washington, D.C. He is, by every metric, the ultimate authority in his region. His signature greenlights operations, dictates policy, and shapes the careers of thousands. Yet in just a few moments, 2 rookie officers who operate under his vast command umbrella are about to treat him like a prime suspect. Marcus had dedicated 24 arduous years of his life to securing the southern boundary. His journey began as a fresh-faced recruit walking the scorching, unforgiving desert floors in heavy boots. Through sheer grit, he transitioned into a tactical instructor, molding the next generation of officers. Eventually, he traded the desert dirt for a corner office lined with strategic maps, overseeing a massive chunk of the American frontier, 24 years. And throughout that entire grueling marathon across thousands of miles and countless inspection points, nobody had ever demanded that he prove he belonged. But behind his personal success lay a more complicated institutional reality. Looking at the broader data, the agency fields around 23,000 officers across the southern frontier. Statistically, the overwhelming majority of this force is Caucasian, hovering around 89%, while minority representation, specifically black officers, sits near 6%. Over the previous 10 years, the department had been hit with over 100 civil rights lawsuits regarding demographic profiling. Internal audits frequently highlighted uncomfortable truths about biased enforcement tactics and difficult working environments for officers of color. Marcus was deeply familiar with these statistics. He had analyzed them in secure briefings and had personally championed rigorous training programs to course-correct the culture. He had navigated this complex environment and risen to the top in spite of these invisible hurdles, completely aware that they existed. He knew that every promotion he earned required him to be absolutely flawless, because simply being average might accidentally validate the unfair biases some peers secretly harbored. Even with his immense power, the kind of authority that literally changes federal systems, there were quiet moments that reminded him of the underlying friction. Occasionally, when Marcus walked into a crowded briefing room, he would catch fleeting glimpses of surprise on the faces of new personnel. Sometimes, when he introduced himself as the top executive, people would ask subtle, probing follow-up questions, as if his prestigious title required a secondary layer of verification simply because of his appearance. He noticed how certain directives were executed just a fraction slower than they should be, a silent test of his authority. Over 2 decades, Marcus had learned to absorb these moments. He recognized them, documented them mentally, and realized that personal excellence wasn't a magic armor, it was simply evidence. And he knew that hard evidence was the only thing that could eventually force real reform. However, on this particular evening, Marcus is not focused on institutional reform, statistics, or the heavy burden of leadership. He is simply a grieving man driving to a funeral. His former partner and oldest friend on the force had suddenly passed away from a heart attack at 59. The memorial was taking place in a border town a few hours away, a place where generations of officers were gathering to pay their final respects. Marcus had flown in that morning, rented a standard silver sedan, and was navigating a lonely stretch of highway as the sun began to dip below the horizon. He was off the clock. He wore a crisp, dark morning suit. His official credentials and designated duty weapon were securely locked away in the trunk. He was listening to the traditional regional music his old partner used to love, quietly rehearsing the eulogy he planned to deliver the next morning. He was just a citizen on a somber errand, completely unaware that he was driving straight into a trap made of his agency's own policies. As twilight hits, the sky turns a bruised desert violet, and the glowing lights of a standard highway inspection point emerge in the distance. Marcus naturally decelerates, merging his rental car into the line of civilian vehicles funneling toward the checkpoint lanes. Two young officers are stationed at the primary stop. They are clad in heavy tactical vests, radios buzzing against their shoulders. The lead officer, a 26-year-old rookie barely 8 months out of the training academy, waves Marcus forward. The legal framework for this specific interaction is supposed to be incredibly simple and strictly defined. According to federal guidelines, officers at this primary juncture are tasked with asking a single, fundamental question regarding legal presence. If the driver calmly states they are a citizen, and the officer observes no concrete justifiable reason to suspect illegal activity, the vehicle is immediately cleared to proceed. By the book, this exchange should consume no more than 20 seconds. But protocols are written on sterile paper, while law enforcement happens in the real world, heavily filtered through human discretion. And discretion is exactly where unconscious bias thrives. Marcus rolls down his window, locking eyes with the rookie, waiting for the standard greeting he has heard 1,000,000 times. The young officer leans in, sweeping his heavy flashlight across the interior of the vehicle. The beam illuminates a discarded fast food wrapper, the dark suit hanging neatly in the back, and finally settles on Marcus. The officer takes in the scene, a well-dressed black man in his late 40s, driving alone in a rental car with out-of-state plates, approaching the border just as darkness falls. The flashlight beam hesitates. The officer's face changes. It isn't a look of recognition, it is the exact opposite. It is a sudden instinctual shift into suspicion. His hand subtly drops to rest on his utility belt. He isn't drawing a weapon, but his body language screams that he is bracing for a threat. When asked about his citizenship, Marcus replies with absolute clarity and professional calm. It is the exact same measured, authoritative tone he uses when briefing lawmakers in the Capitol. But the rookie officer doesn't hear a seasoned leader. Through the lens of his limited experience and ingrained assumptions, he hears a man who is entirely too calm. In the frantic environment of highway interdiction, rookies are taught that nervous civilians are normal, while absolute calm implies rehearsal, and rehearsal implies criminality. The officer immediately pivots to a secondary line of questioning, asking Marcus about his travel origins. This is the exact moment the interaction morphs from a routine legal check into an active criminal investigation. And again, the underlying data paints a vivid picture of this transition. While standard follow-up questions happen in a single-digit percentage of overall stops, independent research shows that minority drivers are subjected to these extended interrogations at nearly 3 times the rate of others. Marcus answers truthfully, stating his departure city. He is staring at the young officer now, not with fear, but with the analytical gaze of a man who has personally authored the training manuals on interrogation techniques. He knows exactly what is happening. When the officer presses him on the purpose of his trip, Marcus explains he is attending a funeral. The rookie visibly scoffs, exchanging a loaded glance with his partner, another probationary officer still trying to prove her worth. They have been conditioned to hunt for behavioral indicators: a rental car, out-of-state tags, a solo driver, nightfall, and answers they deem evasive. In their minds, Marcus is checking every single box. When asked whose funeral he is attending, Marcus hesitates. He doesn't pause because he is lying. He pauses because his brilliant, strategic mind is running a rapid calculation. Does he drop his absolute authority right now and crush the rookies? Or does he remain silent and let this play out to witness exactly how far his own agency will go when they think nobody important is watching? He decides to hold his tongue and simply says it is a former colleague. To the rookie, that brief moment of calculation registers as pure deception. He has been trained to believe that honest people speak instantly, while guilty people hesitate. He has absolutely no idea that the man sitting in the sedan is a top-tier executive, essentially running an undercover audit on his own personnel. The rookie orders Marcus to pull his vehicle over into the secondary inspection lot. Consider the sheer weight of this moment. The commander of Southwest Operations, the man who literally dictates the enforcement strategy for thousands of miles of American soil, has just been detained by subordinates who report directly up his chain of command. And it isn't because he violated a traffic law, and it isn't because they possessed any articulable facts of a crime. It is simply because a young officer looked at a demographic profile and allowed his misguided assumptions to override objective reality. This is what happens when an institution trains its people to rely heavily on gut instincts without simultaneously teaching them that human instincts are often just personal biases masquerading as professional intuition. Marcus puts the car in gear and slowly rolls into the brightly lit gravel lot. Other cars are already entirely dismantled, dogs are sniffing perimeters, and massive floodlights cast long, harsh shadows. He parks, cuts the engine, and places his hands firmly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. He waits. Legally speaking, forcing a driver into this secondary area requires more than a mere hunch. It demands articulable facts, specific observable details that can be documented and defended in a court of law. Yet internal reviews that Marcus himself had forced the agency to conduct revealed that nearly 70% of these escalations were justified by nothing more than nervous behavior, a highly subjective catch-all excuse. Marcus had fought violently against this lazy standard. He had issued blistering memos demanding concrete evidence for detentions. Tonight he is experiencing firsthand exactly how thoroughly his memos have been ignored. The rookie approaches the driver's side door, now backed by 3 additional officers. Their hands hover over their holsters. The tension is palpable. When ordered out of the vehicle, Marcus complies flawlessly. He announces every single micro-movement before he makes it. I am unbuckling my belt. I am opening the door. My hands are empty. He knows this intricate dance of submission perfectly because he is the architect who designed it. He wrote the safety protocols they are executing, and now he is trapped inside them. When asked if there is anything dangerous in the vehicle, Marcus calmly states that his federal law enforcement credentials and a secured duty weapon are locked in the trunk. This is the critical juncture. Standard operating procedure rigidly dictates that the moment a subject claims federal authority, officers must immediately de-escalate, verify the identity through official channels, and extend professional courtesy. But the rookie doesn't reach for his radio. He doesn't call dispatch. Instead, he looks at Marcus with a mixture of disbelief and open mockery. The gap between the absolute truth Marcus is speaking and the prejudiced reality the rookie lives in is simply too wide to bridge. The officer actually laughs, a dry, incredulous sound, and demands to know which agency Marcus claims to work for. when Marcus quietly states the name of their own department, adding that he is the senior executive director of the region, the night air goes completely still. The young officers have seen that title on 100 different policy emails. They know it commands godlike authority in their world, but none of them have ever seen the man in person. And the dignified figure standing before them in a morning suit simply does not align with the mental image their biases have constructed for a person of such immense power. Instead of verifying, the rookie doubles down, aggressively stating that people impersonate federal agents all the time. Marcus merely nods and tells them to go ahead and verify it. In that calm response lies a terrifying, controlled fury. He stands shivering slightly in the cool night air, surrounded by armed rookies, floodlights glaring in his eyes. His thoughts drift back to his fallen friend, to the beautiful speech about the unbreakable brotherhood of the badge he was supposed to deliver. In this sterile gravel lot, that brotherhood feels like a devastating lie. He realizes that a uniform does not protect you if your physical appearance causes people to doubt your right to wear it. The heaviest burden is his own sense of complicity. He helped build the very machine that is currently chewing him up. For 17 agonizing minutes, Marcus is detained. He isn't in handcuffs, but he is legally frozen, surrounded by armed guards. He misses his check-in. He misses the chance to comfort a grieving widow. He is trapped because his own officers cannot fathom his reality. Finally, a veteran field supervisor arrives on the scene in a marked truck. This man has 15 years on the job. He has sat in strategic planning sessions with Marcus. He has literally had his performance reviewed by him. The supervisor steps out of the truck, looks at the young officers, looks at the man by the Honda, and the blood instantly drains from his face. The supervisor stammers out a horrified apology, desperately trying to frame the catastrophic failure as a simple misunderstanding. But Marcus refuses to offer the grace of that word. A misunderstanding is a clerical error. This was an execution of institutionalized profiling. The trunk is popped. The gold executive badge gleams under the harsh floodlights. The young rookies physically recoil, stepping back into the shadows as the gravity of their career-ending mistake crashes down on them. Marcus quietly retrieves his belongings and looks the trembling supervisor dead in the eye. He doesn't scream. He doesn't curse. He simply orders a completely unedited, meticulously detailed incident log to be placed on his desk by Monday morning, explicitly naming every single officer involved. The fallout is seismic. Before Marcus even reaches his hotel, the agency is in full meltdown mode. Frantic reports fly up the chain of command, bypassing regional offices and landing directly on the desks of the highest-ranking officials in the nation. The deputy commissioner practically begs Marcus to pick up his phone to accept an apology. Marcus ignores the ringing. He sits alone in his hotel room, still wearing the suit meant for his friend's funeral, meticulously drafting what will soon become the most explosive internal complaint in the history of the department. He never makes it to the funeral. By Tuesday, the story leaks to the press, sending shockwaves across the country. A top federal executive detained by his own forces due to demographic profiling. Congress demands immediate hearings. The media swarms. But the true tragedy, the detail that the news initially glosses over, is that Marcus is not an isolated incident. He is just the only one with enough power to force the world to watch. When journalists finally dig into the Freedom of Information requests, they discover over 100 previously buried complaints from minority officers within the same department, all detailing identical stories of being profiled, doubted, and detained by their own peers. The rot was deep, and it was systemic. When Marcus returns to his headquarters, the atmosphere is suffocating. He walks past his own framed portrait on the wall, wondering how many of his subordinates look at that picture and respect a leader, and how many just see a man they would pull over on a dark highway. The temptation to resign, to take his pension, and walk away from the toxicity is immense, but he knows that leaving would only validate the broken system. It would prove that the pressure works. So Marcus digs his heels in. He launches a massive federal civil rights lawsuit. The government desperately tries to make the nightmare vanish. They review the damning evidence, the radio logs proving officers refuse to verify his identity, the security footage of a senior executive surrounded by armed rookies, the agonizing 17-minute detention time. They throw massive settlement offers at him, hoping a quiet payout will buy his silence, but Marcus weaponizes his insider knowledge. He demands a brutal discovery process. He demands the raw data on every single traffic stop, every secondary search, every detention across the entire Southern Territory. He knows exactly where the agency hides its ugly secrets because he helped write the rules. Faced with complete institutional exposure, the government surrenders. They settle for over $8 million. But the money is almost an afterthought to Marcus. He refuses to sign the agreement unless it includes non-negotiable sweeping mandates for reform. He forces the implementation of rigorous modernized bias training that specifically targets how officers interact with minority civilians and peers. He mandates strict time limits on roadside detentions. No one will ever be held in the dark for 17 minutes without an automatic high-level review. He establishes a dedicated 24-hour hotline for immediate credential verification. Furthermore, he forces the agency to publicly publish their demographic stop data, dragging their internal practices out of the shadows and into the glaring light of public accountability. Marcus stays in his executive chair for 2 more grueling years. He doesn't just pass down the new rules, he enforces them with an iron fist. He shows up at checkpoints unannounced in the dead hour of night. He audits the body camera footage. When resistant officers complain that the new oversight makes it too hard to do their jobs, Marcus looks them in the eye and tells them that if they cannot secure the border without relying on lazy prejudice, they do not belong in a uniform. Eventually, the culture begins to fracture and heal. Data shows a massive 41% drop in biased traffic stops, and internal complaints plummet by over half. The system isn't magically cured, but a massive tourniquet has been applied to the wound. After 26 years of service, Marcus finally retires. He spends his remaining years advocating on massive stages, consulting with struggling police departments, and speaking truth to power in congressional halls. When young minority recruits reach out to him, asking if the badge is worth the pain, he gives them the hard truth. Joining a broken system doesn't fix it, and climbing the ranks doesn't make you immune to its flaws. But if you gather enough knowledge, demand enough data, and absolutely refuse to back down when the machine turns its teeth on you, you can force it to evolve. Years later, Marcus finds himself driving down that exact same stretch of Texas highway. He is in his personal vehicle now. As he rolls up to the checkpoint, the officer glances at him, asks a single question, and waves him through in under 15 seconds. As the red taillights of his car fade into the desert night, a heavy question lingers in the air. Was he waved through because he forced the entire agency to rewrite its DNA? Or was it simply because he was no longer driving a suspicious rental car? It is a haunting reality that true change is slow, fragile, and deeply complicated. Because all the money in the world couldn't buy Marcus the one thing he truly deserved that night: to be judged by the content of his character and the weight of his achievements rather than a fleeting, flawed assumption. So, I turn it back to you. When an institution has these kinds of flaws baked into its very foundation from the beginning, is it ever possible to truly fix it from the inside out? And if you found yourself in Marcus's shoes that night, would you have dropped your rank immediately to end the humiliation, or would you have endured the silence to expose the broken protocol? I would love to read your perspectives down in the comments. Thank you so much for joining me for this incredible story, and I will see you all in the next deep dive.